Well, hello, everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host Peter Lavelle in Moscow and by Jeremy Nell in Cape Town, and by our main guest today, Simon Elmer, who joins us from Hong Kong. We've rather presumptuously entitled this week's forum, The Truth About China. And as everybody knows, the truth is multiple and varied and multifaceted. So perhaps calling it The Truth was, as I say, a little presumptuous. Simon Elmer is based in Hong Kong. Simon, you traveled recently to China, as did Jeremy Nell. And when we first set up the show, you were in debunking mode. You wanted to come on to debunk the myths about China. But I gather from our email exchanges that you're in slightly less in debunking mode. Tell us what you thought you were going to see and what you did see.
Yes, hello, John. Thank you for having me on the show. So I've been here 2 years, and maybe I just point out Hong Kong is in China, even though a lot of people in Hong Kong refuse that honor. And I came here partly because my partner was got a job here, but we were very interested, both of us, in going to China and trying to find out as much as mainland China, that is, and find out about it as much as we could. We've both traveled there, I don't know, a dozen times now, going to different cities all over it. I think it's very difficult to talk about China. It's such a big place, and we found great differences between the different cities and the different areas. But we had a very positive attitude towards it. And I think our first visits, when we sort of got over the strangeness of the place, just how different it is, it seemed to be very accommodating. For instance, when I first went to Beijing, I thought, how on earth are we going to use the metro system? But everything's in English, which you certainly don't get in the West. So we were very delighted at that.
And my experience in Beijing is that if you had problems in the metro, people are quite willing to help you.
Yeah, it's a very, 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 very friendly place. We were struck by things like the lack of police. I'm originally from London. I've been living in London most of my life. You cannot step outside your door without meeting police on a street in London. And they're not any police. They're riot police. They're people carrying. It's quite familiar now to see someone with an automatic machine gun, sort of walking through shopping centers, train stations, and so on. The police presence in China is tiny. And the police themselves are quite small. They're usually kind of youngish men, and they look very unaggressive. The first time I was in Beijing, I saw a man who was out in the evening, and he was drunk. And he was a little bit kind of scrappy and kind of being slightly aggressive with sort of about 6 police who tried to calm him down. And it struck to my mind the very different way he'd be treated in the UK. He would be thrown to the floor and probably lasered. So our first impressions were very good. Just thinking about not simply this extraordinary culture, but how different it seemed to the things that we were told about China, that we are continuously told about China, that it is a dictatorship, that you have, you're constantly being bullied, you're being surveyed, watched, and so on and so forth. So we went there with a very positive attitude, and I think up until maybe last year rather, when we were coming back from the far west, from Lijiang, and we tried to do something rather strange. We tried to sort of capture about 6 different types of transport to get back to Hong Kong in a single day. We didn't make it, not because of the transport, because everything runs on time, but a typhoon came in and one of the planes was delayed. And there was a kind of an accumulation of the security measures that we had to go through to do this. Travel in China is, and this is not just for us as foreigners, but for the Chinese themselves, is a succession of security checks. And they're very particular types of security checks. If you want to get onto the metro, you have to go through what you would effectively do in an airport in the West. You're constantly having, I must have had my face photographed through facial recognition cameras, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of times in the time I'm there. You're constantly being kind of going through security checks. This you kind of get used to it. That's the scary thing in a way, as we will in the West. I think it suddenly becomes normal to be checked, and I began to think about how that was done. One of the things that really struck us, which I think we can talk about later on, is the use of smartphones there. I've just been to Guangzhou, or in Cantonese Guangzhou, which is in Guangdong province, immediately north of Hong Kong, and also went to Shenzhen, which is one of the most extraordinary cities you'll ever see in the world. When the economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping were introduced in 78, 79, Shenzhen was at the edge, was a town of 35,000 people. It's now a city of 17.5 million. I don't think any city has gone through that in the history of the world. And Shenzhen, Guangzhou were at the center of this new economic zone, a kind of experimental economic zone, when the Republic of China, as the People's Republic of China, experimented effectively with a form of neoliberalism. And it's had this extraordinary explosion. It's a remarkable city itself. We found out from someone we spoke to there that it was actually modeled on the Garden City concept introduced by the British architect and urban planner Abercrombie. And it is this huge, extensive city with enormous number of parks in it. Now I'm about to confess something here. I don't have, or I've only recently acquired a smartphone. I've been against them for a very, very long time. I am still against them, and I use them minimum. I use it in Hong Kong because I can't use any other kind of phone here. I need to communicate with people. So I'm particularly susceptible to the way that smartphones affect people, how they're used. And I think there's two things. First of all, I went with my partner, my girlfriend, when we went to Guangzhou, we found that we couldn't pay for restaurants. We couldn't pay for taxis. We couldn't pay for even metro tickets using a credit card or a debit card. Those have almost been phased out there. It's very, very difficult. Not entirely. If you go into we found a wonderful bar which was made for Guaylo, for Westerners, and they certainly took our credit cards there. But everywhere else they didn't. In the metros, they sometimes took cash if you had small notes, but generally didn't. But it was genuinely difficult to get around without a smartphone on which, as a foreigner, you have Alipay, which is a kind of an online payment system. Most of the Chinese use WeChat Pay. Sorry, this is all kind of new language to me, and it's everywhere. You really can't get around China. Most of China, not all of it. The cities are different, without a smartphone and without downloading these apps. And you don't simply download them, you have to apply for them, and they have to authorize it, and they link it to a bank account. And this time it actually became a problem. My partner was going to work with her students. She's a lecturer, professor, and I had the day off on my own, and I actually couldn't get around. I was trapped in a way. It was very, very strange and very, very difficult.
You were trapped because you didn't have the payment systems. You didn't have the Alipay.
I didn't have the payment system at all. And we went there in anticipation of this show, not just because of that. I wanted to talk to people about this thing that we hear talked about so much in the West, and I think quite inaccurately in many cases. And it is the system of social credit. And I guess that's what I think it would be useful to talk about this, because I guess the people listening to this show will be interested not only in what's going on in China with this remarkable place, but also what it's going to tell us about where we're going now. You know, in the UK, the government has come out and said we are going to instigate a system of biometrically verified digital identity. People don't seem to think it. You know, the other day I saw some footage of there was a protest going through London, and other protests against digital ID, and everyone was holding their smartphones. And I thought, how do you think this system is going to work? Digital ID, in my opinion, isn't one thing. It's simply the nexus that links everything that we've already got, our passports, our bank accounts, and so on and so forth. In China, though, it's gone beyond that. It's not simply, I'll pause in a minute so you can come back. It's not simply a system of payment, which goes through a digital network and links everything. It's also linked to a system of social credit in which your behavior becomes it becomes a form of credit itself. It's not, and it affects every aspect of your life. So over the last few weeks, I mean, I've been writing about social credit, trying to find out what it's about. It's very hard to find this. And when I talk to people in China or people in Hong Kong about it, they don't really have a lot to say about it. Not, I think, because they're scared of being, of exposing themselves. I think because, very much like digital ID in the West, nobody talks about what it actually is and how it actually functions. I think to understand these new apparatuses of governance, if you want to call them that, of biopower, I think, to use Foucault's term, you have to understand the mechanics of it. And for me, social credit, digital identity, central bank digital currency, these are all different names for what are essentially the same things. they all go through smartphones. Okay, I'll pause there.
And when you say, Simon, that behavior becomes itself a form of credit, what does that mean? What do you mean exactly?
Well, okay. I actually found this document quite a few years ago, but I didn't read it all. It serves me right because I should have. It's a document that was issued in 2014 by the State Council of China. And it was issued to all provincial, autonomous, region, municipal people's governments, all state council ministries, commissions, everyone. In other words, the entire vast apparatus of a very complex system of governance that they have in China, which goes down, it's an enormous sort of thing. And it was issued in 2014, and it's called the Planning Outline for the Construction of a Social Credit System. And the dates are 2014 to 2020. It was actually agreed to do this at the 18th National Congress in 2012. The outline was handed down to these various bodies in 2014, and the date for its completion of this period of construction of it was 2020, which of course happened to be the year of lockdown itself.
Yeah.
Reading through it, you get a sense of the reach of this thing. They talk about building credit in every aspect of Chinese society, from the government all the way down, in medicine, in construction, in finance, in statistics, in culture, everything you can think of. And it says this, and reading the document, it's a real eye-opener. It's very hard to come away from this without, I mean, it's impossible actually, to not see this as a program of totalitarian surveillance, monitoring, and control. And it says very explicitly, the term they use in this, it's a very Chinese document, the term they use is they want to promote integrity in all these areas of Chinese society. But they say something which, for me, really rang a bell, because I've done a lot of research into the way that central bank digital currency is working, or is proposed to work, by the Bank of England itself. China doesn't need it doesn't. I don't think it talks about central bank digital currency, because in effect they've already got it through this system aligned to things like Alipay and WeChat, and that is that integrity in any form of transaction, financial, commercial, or social, is, they call it, a new norm, new norms of behavior, which are going to become consciously adopted by every citizen of the Chinese state. And it's amazing how that word new normal, it just goes across all these different, the whole world really. But then it says very explicitly that it expects the various bodies who are implementing the system of social government to create a framework in which people are incentivized and rewarded for compliance. They don't use the word for compliance, for demonstrating their integrity, but also punished and constrained for not demonstrating that, which means a lack of compliance as well. And this, to me, it reminded me very much about what the Bank of England said about, and the various discussions around it, how money under central bank digital currency stops only being a means of exchange and becomes a mechanism for rewarding and punishing behavior. So I read this and I suddenly thought, a lot of the things I thought about China are wrong. And a lot of the things that people have been saying about it is, I don't think they're exactly accurate, but there is something here. And I think in a way it's not seen, in the same way that people in the West don't see that smartphones are tracking devices and controlling devices. I think a lot of the people don't see this. Just briefly, I think there's two reasons for this. In China, they have something called the hukou system, which is, it goes back many, many, many years, and it's about controlling people's movement around the country. China has a very small, relatively small amount of arable land, and to remain independent in its agricultural produce, it can't have everyone running into the cities. They can't have something like Shenzhen going on all over the place. Otherwise, they would be dependent on other countries, mostly hostile countries, to feed their own people. So I was looking up the figures today. Shenzhen has something like, it's about 2/3 of the people in Shenzhen are internal migrants, Chinese migrants who've come from outside, and there. And because they don't have hukou, this rights, they don't have rights to welfare, to housing, to education, and all this sort of stuff. So there is a history, if you like, of being controlled centrally by some system of governance. So I think for the Chinese, when this was brought in, I think there was less resistance to it, I guess, than one might have expected, of course. And of course, there's that other history.
Well, Simon, you bring up a good less resistance you would have expected. I think that's really interesting, and obviously your knowledge is far greater than mine. But I mean, how much is this a expression of Han culture about having consensus in society? I mean, when I think we use a lot of new techno terms, tech overlords and all of this. But is this also a reflection of how the Chinese see their own society before this kind of technology? Because this drive towards consensus, of unity, these are all there way before the smartphone. My point is, how much is this a reflection of cultural values that have been long-standing in their culture?
Yeah, I think yes, you're right. I think one of the reasons that communism, if that's what you want to call it, is going on here, certainly the idea of collective responsibility, of collective values, of the suppression, certainly in the early days, and more than suppression under Mao Zedong and the kind of the revolutionary period. I think communism provided an ideology which allowed China to condense 250 years of industrial revolution into 50, and the vast sacrifice that took, and also the extraordinary violence that emerged, that kind of was a result of that.
And to unite a country that had been divided, and at the hands of the West for well over 100 years. I mean, I asked when I was in China last. I asked, I said, "Is China a communist country?" And they all kind of, yes and no. I mean, this is the organizing principle. That's what it is. It's not an ideology. It's an organizing principle.
Yes, I keep asking myself that question as well. Is it a communist country? Certainly, to answer your question, I mean, one of the things that I'm kind of quite angry about, actually, if I can just say it before you come in, Jeremy. China has achieved an economic miracle. It has brought something like, since 2012, it's brought something like close to 100 million people out of poverty, as defined by the World Bank. That's a greater number of people at a greater rate than any country's done in the history of the world. Trust me, if you've all been to China, I suppose, haven't you? Europe looks backward technologically compared to it. There is very little crime. There is really respect for other people. And as you said, Peter, they did this after a century, what they call the century of shame, of occupation, of invasion by the Japanese, of tariffs, which continue to this day from the US and so on. What they have done is a miracle. The question I came here to ask, in a sense, is at what cost has that miracle been achieved? And the thing about social credit is, which annoys me, which I'm very, very angry about, actually, is social credit is not necessary, I don't think, from what I've seen of China. I don't know. It's a vast country. It seems to me to be a product of the immense power and control that the various governing bodies of China, of which the CCP, of course, is the ultimate one, and its constitution, have over the Chinese people. China is no longer in a revolutionary period, in the sense that it's not going through the enormous events that it had to in the after the founding of the party, of the republic. There's no need to do this. They're not fighting internal rebellion. They've got threats from outside, but they're always going to have that from the USA and the West. But they're the strongest economy in the world. By purchasing parity, there's the GDP mark with the PPP. They're 50%. They're about 30% higher than the USA. They don't need a system of social credit, and I think we need to understand it. Personally, I don't think it's got anything to do with politics. I think it's got to do with technology. Because when I look at
with culture, I think that this is a fusion. This is a fusion of the two. This is it's there may be cultural impulses put on steroids, because one of the things I always have problems with, and it's because I've lived in Russia for 25 years, is that you really have to peel away what we consider as social goods, what are social outcomes, and rethink them, and try to rethink them holistically from where I am looking out. Now, this technology terrifies me. Okay, I'm absolutely in agreement with you on that. Okay, but is this benign, or is it or is it pernicious? Okay, and I think if we apply our Western values or outlook, we can end up there. It may be absolutely true. I just wonder if it's just presumptuous. That's all.
Well, I know that Jerm wants to jump
Yeah,
in.
let's jump in.
So I spent almost a month traveling through China last month. Went to about 9 cities, from Shanghai all the way to Xinjiang, and to Aksu, to Urumqi, Kashgar, Turpan, and so on. And we also drove through the Taklamakan desert. We did a cross section from the north down to the south. Took about 11 hours. And we also went to the most isolated village in China, which has a population of about 100 people. And it was literally 3 hours of driving through a sandy desert. There was no road. I also have a similar impression of China as you do. It's impossible to operate with cash. You have to use WeChat or Alipay. And I found huge military presence in Xinjiang. But I suppose that's because of the Belt and Road Initiative, and because of the countries that border China, and as well as the sort of political instability of that region. We know that MI6 has had a number of sort of offenses into the sort of the bordering cities of Xinjiang, which is why the border to Afghanistan at the moment is closed. Now, I think Peter hits on some very important points here. There is a culture in China that I noticed that's very different to everything that we think we know. They are a culture that tends to be Han culture, tends to be more submissive to the state. And I think that is... I had conversations with people there, and I think it has to do, Simon, with history. The long history of the Mongols and the Uyghur and the whole region of fighting, and the centuries of sort of dictatorship, monarchical, what do you call dynasties?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I found that their system works. Listen, I'm African, and we have a very broken system, and I quite like it. It's very decentralized, and there's a sense of freedom within our chaos. But I can certainly see and appreciate how the Chinese system works. They do like control, because when you've got 1.5 billion people, and you've got a city like Shanghai that's got 30 million people, and I believe around 15 million cameras, which is 1 camera for every 2 people. I don't know how many of those cameras work, and I don't know how much enforcement actually occurs. But what I do know is, and this is from conversations I had with people there, 30 years ago, now this is important, because the same time frame, South Africa went from apartheid to where we are now. Okay, so in the same time frame, Shanghai, which was 50% rural and had high crime and was chaotic, went to what it is now, probably the world's most advanced city. My country has pretty much gone backwards in the same time frame, in almost every respect. So what is it that they did? And my guess is there is a sense of a strong sense of authoritarianism. But the Chinese people with whom I spoke appreciated, because they remember when they were on food rations in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so when you look at how everything is turned around, they seem to be okay with lots of surveillance. and with a fairly centralized state. Now, I'm not defending it, but I'm trying to understand why it's always the Westerners critiquing them, but they're not the ones critiquing their own system. You know what I mean? Because it works, and they're not the ones trying to export it either. It's NATO trying to export its system, like we're going to bring democracy, but you don't see China saying we're going to bring communism. And also on that, I've also had a tug of war with what these words mean, and I've come to the conclusion that these words don't mean anything. Yes. They really don't mean. Yes. You can't apply one word to 1.5 billion people. It just doesn't make sense. It's a highly capitalist society. It's got aspects of centralization. The government obviously controls the banks and it controls utilities and all that kind of thing. And then you got this huge private sector where you got like Apple and Samsung and funny enough, America loves to talk about its Teslas, but 50% of Teslas are built in I think Shanghai. So it's a highly complex system. It's very nuanced. It's not a binary. I don't think we can approach this at all with any kind of binary thinking. I might have it wrong, but that's just my impression.
Could I also come back on something that you said, Simon? You were talking about the internal restrictions on movement. You gave it the Chinese name, which I'm afraid I have now forgotten, and I wouldn't have been able to.
The hukou system.
Yes, that's it. Yes. Well, of course, in the Soviet Union they had that, the propiska, and but I'm very struck. Well, I'm struck by lots of things you said. First of all, you know very extremely well, Simon, because we talked about it when you last came on, that the whole notion of control, social control, is very, very present in the West. And if they want to introduce digital currencies and so on, that's because they have an admiration for this and a fascination with this kind of system, which they would like to implement in our own countries. Perhaps they already have. And more ideologically, the Westerners, including, by the way, a Nobel Prize winner, Nobel Economics Prize winner, from memory, I think his name is Richard Thaler, who co-wrote with Cass Sunstein back in, I think, 2008. He coined the phrase "the nudge." The nudge is the phrase given to the use of behavioral sciences in government, which, of course, now has become the norm in Britain and maybe across Europe and possibly in America as well. But I was very struck, Simon, by your little anecdote about the southern town opposite Hong Kong. Is it Guangzhou? Is that right? The town you said is now 17.5 million.
Shenzhen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you've said that this city went from whatever the previous figure was, 200,000 or something, to 17.5.
35,000.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and absolutely, as you said, I mean, that's never happened anywhere else in the entire history of humanity. But that surely, that provokes in me two thoughts. First of all, if you were in any country with such massive social changes, which meant cities going from 35,000 to 17.5 million, that is a colossal change. Obviously, you would indeed probably try to limit it, because that is such an immense change. And you mentioned the agricultural dimension and so on, but you would indeed try to limit a movement, even if it's only an internal movement of that size. And the second thought that your anecdote provokes in me is this: it clearly didn't work, because if they tried to limit the growth of this city, it was obviously been a complete failure. So that's my pennyworth on the back of what Jan just said, which was extremely interesting. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah. Yes, maybe we go back to this idea about culture, because I kind of agree. I certainly agree that this idea, these terms, communism and democracy, really have very limited use nowadays. I mean, a Western, what's it called? It's something like there's some group of people who get together, including people like Microsoft, and they do a kind of a democracy index, and they go around and they canvass people in countries.
Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, and they sort of say, to
Freedom
people,
House.
How important do you think freedom as a democracy is, and how democratic do you think your country is? And I think China came highest in the value they gave to democracy, and I think they came second in terms of saying how much they think their country is democratic. their model of democracy is based on their extremely complex, which I'm not going to try to explain here because I've written it down and I still can't remember it all. But it's the word they use is consultative democracy, which comes from the bottom up, and it goes through this series of very complex things up to this point here. I mean, all that's put in question. Maybe not get into that, but the what's happening at the top of the tree, if you like. But I guess what my real interest is the social credit system and how it actually is going to work, because it's still developing. I think it's certainly not a complete thing. Peter, to go back to your idea about culture and what you said, John, about nudging. In the UK, every time you go to a shop and you buy a shirt or something like that, or you go for a meal, or you buy something online, or if you go through all these transactions, you'll usually get something on your phone saying, would you rate your transaction? That, I think, is the base. That's the beginning, well, not the beginning, because we've been doing this for a long time with things like nudging, of a social credit system. My partner and I have kind of talked about this. She has a smartphone, so she sort of understands how this works a little bit better than I. But in China, you're constantly being asked at every social, physical transaction, every cultural transaction, every time you purchase something, every time you move about, to verify your right to do that. You're verifying your identity, which is linked to your credit rating. And the people, I won't say who it is, but the people I've spoken to, managed to speak to, people who live there, about the social credit system. Unfortunately, I couldn't get out of them the mechanics of it. They simply said, if you, for instance, you talk online and you criticize the Chinese government, they will not permit that. You can criticize something they've done. You said you would build this many houses here, or you said you would have clean water here, and you haven't done it. And they go, okay, that's a failing. We'll find out who's responsible and we'll make someone do it better. But you can't say we're against the CCP and the governance system. You can't really do that anywhere in the West at all now either. They'll call it hate speech or something like that.
Yeah.
But he wasn't able to actually understand, I think, or to talk to me about and explain how an actual system of social credit. I've had two examples. I went last week to hear the Secretary of State for Housing in Hong Kong, because I don't think Hong Kong and mainland China are actually as different as they think they are, or at least Hong Kong thinks they are. And she was talking, she's in charge of public housing provision in Hong Kong, immensely powerful. And she said she was trying to work out how to stop Hong Kongers in public housing throwing cigarette butts out the window of their towers, because it falls down. Hong Kongers all put their washing out, and it burns holes in people's washing. A very simple act of what we call antisocial behavior. And she said, oh, well, we've got a point system. And if you do that and you get caught, that's 1 point. If you get 15 points, you no longer have a right to public housing. She said this quite casually in the conversation. Nobody seemed to think anything of it. I was kind of writing this all down. I thought, that's an example of a social credit system. When I was in Shenzhen, the hotel we stayed in, very nice hotel, the guy afterwards said, could you rate us? Could you write down and give us a review? And I was like, I don't do reviews because I don't like this system of kind of constant surveillance, everyone constantly acting as an informer on each other, even if it only seems like, how good was the person who gave me my burger or whatever it is. But he said, can you make sure it's all 5 stars? Because if I don't, they'll reduce my salary. Now, this is not part of a centralized government thing. This was a private hotel, if you like. But I don't believe that. I think, well, I'm not sure if it's a centralized, I don't think we can put this all down to a government system. It's bigger than that. And I think,
Simon,
I think that's the way it's working in the West as well.
I mean, but by constantly doing this, you're willingly legitimizing the system too. You're reinforcing it.
Yeah. Can I jump in here quickly, Simon?
Yeah, go.
The social credit thing has piqued my interest immensely, and it's something that I deliberately searched for when I was in China, and I didn't see anything to any significant degree that is different from the UK. In fact, it's probably worse in the UK and in the US. I did see it. Well, not social credit, but excessive surveillance in the airports. There's no doubt about that. In actual fact, there are cameras everywhere you go in China. But in terms of social credit, I was thinking about what this actually even means. I mean, I remember visiting Sydney in the early 2000s, and a friend of mine said, we went for a drive, and he said, "Look, we've got a type of demerit system here that you lose points if you break the road rules, and then if you lose, like, let's say 15 points in 1 year or whatever, you lose your license for 6 months or something like that." Now that is a social credit score, because it's rating your behavior. If I don't know where in the world this is different, but if you have a criminal record, you're going to struggle to get a bank loan anyway. And that's also a social credit score. It's not like we're suddenly waking up to this concept. I'm not saying it's okay. Understand where I'm coming from. I'm not saying it's okay, but what I am saying is that it's creeping. And I don't think China is necessarily way more advanced than the rest of the world. Even they might say so on paper, but in reality, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, but the difference is here, and I think John and I are August age now. I mean, we think in terms of how the state limits our freedoms, nudges us to make choices which we don't like. But again, isn't this kind of presumptuous? I mean, do Chinese people find this oppressive? My freedom of expression, my freedom, my sense of myself, do they even think in those terms at all? Okay, because it's an organized. I remember when I was at a BRICS conference and I was being picked up by the airport by these TGCN people. And I said, looking at those vast buildings and everything, I said, well, what percentage is the country middle class? She said, we're all middle class. Everyone's.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes. And, there are some rich people, but everyone is in the middle class. Okay. I don't like to be constrained. Okay. But culturally, I always got this, when I was there, it was like, we are together. We have the same apps. We have the same tastes. We have the same ambitions. Consumerism is what the ambition I got from them. Okay. For the most part. But no, it just like organized. Things are organized. And they're very proud of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, Jeremy. I mean, sorry, Jeremy. When I walk around there, I'm kind of looking for social credit, and I don't see it. The sort of the cliche that people spread about China, that if you jaywalk there, you lose the social credit. Now, I can definitely say
jaywalked all the time.
Because walking around at Chinese cities, you're just trying not to get run over by the people on scooters, who are all going around and stuff. So that's absolutely rubbish. You're also absolutely right about. If we say, if you drive your car badly, you get points off your license. If you do it further, you might get a fine. If you do it further, you might end up in jail eventually, and then you'll be banned. That is a kind of a credit system. So I see similarities to do that, but I think there is also a difference. First of all, there's an aspect of social credit which I agree with. In the UK, I spend a lot of my time following people doing bad things with their businesses, and it seems to me that whatever you do in the UK, you simply declare bankruptcy, and the next day you set up a new business and you do it all over again. Now in China, a lot of the social credit system, I would actually say the primary function of it is to regulate corruption, which is a big thing in China, a big campaign to eradicate it, particularly in governmental levels. When you've got a state which is so powerful, corruption is going to be a really big problem. And of businesses as well, of corporations and businesses and so on. And if they behave badly, there are consequences for the people who do that. They can't simply write it off and start again. So there is a good side to integrity in business and so on and so forth. But again, I'm trying to, I'm sorry I can't sort of come out with a clear formulation of this. I've been working on this for a very long time, and it's quite hard to understand. To answer your question, when we say to people, when we have said to some of the people we've met in China, academics and so on, we say, tell us about social credit. They say things like, well, the government is watching you. They know everything. And then I say, well, why don't you get rid of your phone? And they say, because it's so convenient. And that seems to me something about a culture. Perhaps you're right, Peter, that's definitely something the Chinese value. Okay, I am being watched, but it's for the greater good because this system is clearly working. And that's a culture which I think is being, if you can call it a culture, it's certainly a norm of behavior, these new norms of behavior, which is being inculcated in the West, where we don't like the state watching us, and we don't necessarily care about the common good. We care about our own personal good, and that's the balance that we have.
But
And we're being changed into that. Sorry, go
Yeah,
on.
I don't know,
mean,
Simon, I don't know though how much the Chinese people are being watched. I know it sounds counterproductive to say that because you have 15 million cameras in Shanghai, but I don't know how many of those cameras actually work. I saw a lot of people riding motorbikes without a helmet, and that's obviously illegal there because I asked. They didn't seem to care, and there were cameras everywhere. I saw jaywalking all over the place. It's the worst. Chinese drivers are the worst that I've ever experienced in my life.
Crazy,
And
crazy.
I'm from and I'm from Africa, and I've never seen driving that bad. I mean,
wow,
I
that's saying something.
Really?
I mean, I
Yeah,
thought
but,
we had,
but Jeremy, isn't it? You may be watched. Someone may be watching you. Is that enough of a deterrent?
this is what I don't know. This is the question I'm kind of getting to, Peter. Is that on the one hand, yes. Okay, so here's an anecdote. I arrive in Shanghai, and I see in my gated community WhatsApp group. I stay in a gated community in a state, whatever you want to call it. I see they're talking about gunshots that are going off just down the road from us, gang violence, and someone's window broke because apparently it was a bomb blast or something. Now I'm seeing this in the WhatsApp group. I've just landed in Shanghai, and my wife and my child are now vulnerable, and so I immediately contact her to see if she's okay and if she heard anything and what's going on. Now, at what point do you concede and say, okay, you know what, the safety of my family is actually more important than my ideological position on surveillance?
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't know where to go with that answer because my default setting is less surveillance. But when you're talking about family safety, suddenly it gets real very quickly. And they have it. They somehow turned everything around, and they are immensely safe. And I don't know, Peter, if it's because of the cameras or if it's because of the fear of the cameras. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they did. I can't figure it out.
Can I jump in and answer that? Because first of all, I don't think it is the cameras. As I said, it's the phones. That's how they. We went into this wonderful bar that we found on the Pearl River, and we said this is the bar in the hotel at the end of the universe. When we got to back Hong Kong, the fan said the recommended Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where it's coming from. So they're listening in on us, and they're kind of we're all part of. That's the surveillance system. I don't think whether the cameras work or not. I think they're simply there for traffic and things like that. The thing. Let me try and get to what I am trying to get to here. I mean, I think Jeremy, what you're saying is a lot of people. I'm not sure I agree with them. Would say part of the purpose of the chaos that is being created in places like the UK, but across Europe, is to then justify bringing in a system like this. And I think that raises a question that I think you, John, brought up at the beginning. I believe it seems quite evident that whatever their means, and they said, I think they definitely want to have a kind of a level of totalitarian control over the people, but China is trying to make its people richer and the country stronger and safer. I think and they're being very successful at it. Whereas in the West, the countries, particularly UK, but I think all the countries are led by people, they're not really led by them, but anyway, who are trying to destroy those countries and make their people poorer. So I think there is a question about the intentions of to what ends this technology is being put. But there is one last issue, how much longer we got? About a quarter of an hour, well, maybe it's not the last one, but something I want to look at. And this is what, John, kind of depressed me a little bit about my most recent trip to China, and that is it's undoubted that China's produced, it's the safest place I've ever been in my life. Absolutely. Anyone can walk anywhere at night. It's incredibly safe. There just doesn't need to be any crime there at all. I'm sure there is in certain areas, but in the places that I've been to at least, which of course are the more sort of privileged city places stuff, it seems like enormously safe place. None of the kind of the crime, the personal crime, at least, that we're threatened with in Europe all the time. But the system of smartphone use people never put down their smartphone. They hold it all the time because they are literally constantly going through a system of identity check and verification linked to their social ID. Another anecdote, when I was in Guangzhou, there was a great big long walkway, a bit like you were talking about, Peter, between the exit of the station and actually getting off on the platform. And it was quite a long way. It must have been about a kilometer or something. And you think this would be a moment where people would, you might think this if you haven't been to Hong Kong, would put away their smartphones and talk to each other, but they don't. When you've seen 500 people walking down and every single one of them is staring at their phone like this, and they're bumping into each other. I saw one guy looking at his phone on a scooter. He actually ran into a pollard on it because he was looking at it. Chinese people do not look away from their phones. They are utterly addicted to it. It's an addiction which is, I call it their opium pipes because of the opium wars, the disgraceful behavior of the British and using that as a form of addiction. I believe it's a form of addiction which is the very worst of anything that we've ever had in the world. And that addiction, I think in the West we're promoting. It seems to me smartphones create addiction. You can't get addicted to a Nokia, but smartphones create addiction. You can see it in children. It's created a kind of a post-human society. People don't talk to each other. I think the people themselves look massively depressed. You know the pose of the young Chinese. One arm is under here because this arm is other way around. Is so weary from holding up a smartphone all day, and they're sort of slouched over, and they look like opium smokers in front of their things. And when I look at that, I take what you're saying, Jeremy, about the safety and what we've all agreed about the vast success of the country as a whole economically. But to quote the Bible, man does not live by bread alone. The Chinese are not short of bread. They need wine as well, and I think they're lacking in that which is beyond bread. There's not a lot of culture going on there. There doesn't seem to be a lot of joy. There doesn't seem to be a lot of there's almost no human interaction around.
I did notice that too.
That concerns me. Yeah,
I noticed that too. Very, very clinical and robotic, and that is that's an observation. No matter where you go in China, it's exactly like that. And that I don't know if that's cultural or if that is a result of excellent state propaganda over the last few decades.
It reminds me very much of Benedict Anderson's imagined community, because they live in a community in which they imagine, which they participate with everyone else, all by themselves. Okay.
And I do think that.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Hang on. Wait, I've got an anecdote. I just want to add to what you're saying about the cell phone culture, because this happened when I was in Shanghai. Went to a restaurant, and on the table, by each person, they had a little wrapper, and inside the wrapper is a cloth to wipe the screen of your cell phone, because of the chopsticks and the splashes from the soup and whatnot. And we asked them about it, and they said, no, this is a service that we give because everybody keeps their cell phones on the table.
Yeah, you see, you go into a restaurant, couples are sitting there. They're looking at their phones. They have cell phone holders. The first thing a Chinese person does, not all of them, but certainly the middle classes, the people you see in the restaurants, when they're served their food, is to take a photo of it and then upload it onto it. I call it addiction. A lot of people don't agree with that, but that's, I think, because they're addicted to their phones. I think most people are, actually.
No, I mean,
I think that's had a very, very negative social consequence.
So the China hawks of the West, they say that China wants to take over the world. How will they if they're looking at their cell phone?
Well, I think
Sorry, John,
I think the addiction problem is clearly a human problem, and certainly is not limited to China. It may be worse, even worse in China, but it's very, very bad everywhere else.
John,
we've entered a slightly go on, John.
No, I was just going to say I want to just balance out my sterling review of China with a few critiques also, and I'm going to completely agree with Simon on. China is exceptionally technocratic, and I think that is a very bad thing. For whatever reason, they have gone that way, and I don't think that the world should follow that path. Facial recognition was everywhere in Xinjiang, everywhere, checkpoints everywhere, and it's not a Mickey Mouse checkpoint either. We're talking about every window in the car has to get rolled down, glasses come off, cap comes off, and you have to look out because there are cameras that look in to see that the people who they think are in the car are in the car. And this is everywhere across Xinjiang. This is something I do not like. And I can quickly and easily see that spreading because there's a strange projection of safety.
And can I say, Joe, that what's happening with this is the quantitative increase in security checks has happened and is continuing to happen. Something qualitatively is changing in the nature of our citizen status. Instead of having rights of citizenship and the laws that constrain those, we are effectively always already guilty and being asked to prove our innocence at every security check. It's a similar inversion to money doesn't become the means for transaction, but a means of rewarding or punishing behavior. Money and citizenship, or the security apparatus, is fundamentally changing how we understand our citizenship. And that is definitely something which is happening in the West. In the West now, we are considered to be guilty. And it's like, well, prove yourself, prove yourself. And I think that has had it's bigger than psychological, a cultural effect, actually, I think, on the Chinese people, which isn't about propaganda. It's not about communism. It's not about the government. It's about the role that technology is happening in changing what it is to be human, what it is to be a citizen, what the law is, what money is, all these big things that kind of rule our lives. And I agree with Jerm. I don't think it's a change. It's definitely not a change for the best. And I don't think the miracle that China has produced, materially, if you like, economically, requires that. I wish it wouldn't go down that route, because I think the West is in trouble.
The continuing down this path that both you and Jeremy have described, will it continue to produce the social goods that the system aims to produce?
It can't. It can't. Why? And I'll tell you why. I don't know if you saw this. I saw almost no pregnant women in Shanghai. I saw almost no kids, no toddlers. This is now, I'm guessing, a consequence of the one-child policy. Now we're seeing what's going on. We are going to probably see a huge population issue in the next 15 to 25 years in China. What is going to happen then? This massive growth and acceleration that they've got, I'm very certain that the Chinese government is aware of this and has no idea what to do.
Well, I just read today, actually, that they were considering doing what we're doing in the West, which is bringing in massive immigration, which is going to be very difficult in China, which is, as you said, I think it's something like 91.5 Han. It's a very homogeneous ethnic community, and it's a massive one as well. But yes, the one-child policy was lifted in, when was it? It was
2015, I think.
Yes, it's a while, but the birth rate is still falling, as it is in the West as well. But I think also, you go to Chinese cities and they are wonderful materially. They're way advanced as us. Their transport system and stuff like that. I find it quite hard there and it's not just simply the distance. When I look at the people, I think to want a better word, that spiritual side of what it is to be human is, I think we could think about this in terms of the evolution. I think we're going through kind of an evolution, not the one you were talking about before in Prices in France. I think the human being is actually becoming a kind of a cybernetic organism. If you want to control people in China, just turn off the internet. I'll do anything. I see kids I saw a kid with this vast smartphone on the train, and we were kind of looking at them, and I think the parent noticed it and said, "Let me just take away your smartphone." And the child exhibited all the behavior of withdrawal from a drug. They were screaming, they were shouting, they were upset. I took out my book and gave it to them, and I said, "Why didn't you write with this?" And I don't think they'd ever seen a pen before. So I think there is a big change coming about, and I think what did you call it? The technocratic, not the technocratic, the kind of the obsession with technology there. I think there's a cost to that. And I don't think it's a necessary cross, because in other respects, China is an extraordinary and wonderful place. Can I end on one little anecdote? I was in Shanghai. We flew in over, and I've never seen such a big industrial site in my life. We stayed on a lovely hotel on a roundabout, a circus as we called it, but it was actually a crossroads. And I looked down, and it was rather dark. It wasn't all lit up, and there were cars going through, there were bikes going through, there were people, and the people didn't go off to the zebra crossings. They just walked straight across the middle like that. And I thought, God, if this was somewhere in England, there'd be blood on the streets. But somehow everyone walked around each other. All the cars stopped. There was no violence. Nobody got out and screamed and shouted at each other. It struck me as a kind of a model of, if you want to call it communism, if you like, certainly of community, of a collective good that was coming from that space, which was produced by the consideration of everyone there for keeping this going. And that was something that made me feel, because I've never seen anything like that anywhere, not in America, not in any country in the world. I can't imagine it happening in Spain. It wasn't good behavior. It was an awareness of how to make this go together. And that to me seemed to be something which wasn't coming from above. It wasn't coming from the technology. People were ignoring the lights. It was coming from something else, which I thought was good. And I wish China would go down that route, as I wish we would as well.
I saw that too.
Can we come halfway here? I mean, but their culture is informing them with their behavior there with technology. It's a fusion of the two.
Yeah.
When you were speaking about when you were speaking about 10 or 15 minutes ago, Simon, you were struggling with your thoughts and struggling to express you're clearly thinking you're working hard on this. You know, there are things you don't like, there are things you like, and so on, which is wonderful. That's what makes us all human beings. Perhaps in conclusion, I could simply introduce a concept that we haven't named, we haven't mentioned so far, and that is morality. Because I got the impression when you seemed to be lost for words for a moment. I wondered if that was the word that you perhaps had in mind, that this pursuit of the common good, this rather paternalistic sense that the social credit system, if it exists, is principally intended, it may of course be abused, but it's principally intended to prevent people throwing cigarette butts out onto other people's washing, or it's intended, which is a good thing, or it's intended to prevent exactly the practices that you've said, you know, you do whatever the hell you like in England and you go bankrupt and you start again. And that seems to me to be, those two examples you've given, I certainly think that sounds fine. And listening to you thinking about this and the conflict between that public collective morality and, on the other hand, notion of rights, which we are of course totally injected with in the English speaking world. You know, we have our rights and the state is our servant and all the rest of it. This is, I would say, a mistake. It's a deformed view of our own traditions, because even if you take the most modern liberal individualists of the 19th century, like John Stuart Mill or Tocqueville or whatever, those people absolutely believed in public morality. And many of them, of course, like Adam Smith, for instance, in the 18th century, they argued that education was necessary in order to improve. So I mean, education, that's a form of nudge. That's a form of social credit system, if you like. The point about education being not just that you're trained to do a job, but that you're educated also in moral values and civic values and so on. And as I say, listening to you, I thought to myself, well, we don't talk about public morality in our own countries anymore. The only morality that's discussed is anti-morality, LGBT values and things like that, things which are corrosive of common values. And of course, Peter's repeated questions about culture that seem to me to be fueling into that same idea. You know, there is perhaps a rather, what we might laugh at it as a rather sort of prudish and perhaps slightly old-fashioned Chinese sense of public morality and so on, a certain collectivism. But as I say, I think if we were to jump in a time machine and go back to the heyday of liberalism in 19th century England, we would of course find a very, very strong dose of public morality. Last thoughts, Simon, before we wrap up.
Well, thank you. You made me feel better about being in China now. I absolutely agree with you. As I said, the term that they use in this outline for the credit system is integrity.
Yeah, exactly.
And as someone who I spent the summer in the UK and Europe, and we could definitely do a lot more integrity in public life.
Absolutely.
And we could do with a lot more, is morality the right word? Let's use it anyway, for the way that we treat each other, undeniably. And that is definitely something which I value every day in China.
And
I guess my fears are about, history shows that when a government or people in power have a kind of technology which will increase
Sure.
that power exponentially in ways that they don't understand, they tend to use it in that way. I don't think social credit is necessary. I think China's already won. I think it's done well. I think it should be opening up, relinquishing its control over its people, and giving them some credit that they've learnt the benefits of this, of what they've given them, and not be. And maybe they will do that. Maybe they will do that. Maybe this. I don't know. I hope, and I hope that's the way it will go. I'm going to stay here and find out, I guess.
Very
Anyway,
good. Well,
I'm very
it's been
confused about
absolutely-
this, and it's been nice to talk to you about it.
It's been fascinating, Simon. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Let's meet again soon collectively. Thank you very much, Simon Elmer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks to all our listeners. All the best. Bye.